The letter in Penelope Parker's trembling hand had been read so many times that the ink was starting to smudge from her tears. But she couldn't stop staring at the words that had shattered her entire world on this sweltering August afternoon in 1882. Columbus, New Mexico's train station, was little more than a wooden platform with a sagging roof that provided minimal shade from the relentless sun. And as the train that had brought her here disappeared into the desert horizon with a mournful whistle, she realized with growing horror that no one was coming for her. The telegram she'd received 3 weeks ago in St. Louis had been explicit. Her Aunt Margaret needed her desperately, was sending money for passage, would meet her at the station. But the letter she'd found pinned to the station wall with her name scrawled across it told a different story entirely, one that made her stomach twist with betrayal and fear. Penelope was 22 years old, had traveled over 1,000 miles alone, and now stood in a town she'd never seen before with exactly $4.17 to her name, one carpetbag of belongings, and nowhere to go. The letter explained in her aunt's shaky handwriting that there had been a terrible mistake, that Margaret couldn't take her in after all, that circumstances had changed, and that Penelope should return to St. Louis immediately. But there was no money for return passage, no explanation of what circumstances had changed, and the cold formality of the words felt like a slap across the face. She stood there on that platform as the sun beat down mercilessly, reading the letter again as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't leave her stranded and alone in the New Mexico territory. Her dark blue traveling dress was far too heavy for this climate, and sweat trickled down her spine as she tried to decide what to do. Behind her, the small station building offered no comfort, just a telegraph office that had closed for the afternoon and a ticket window with a surly clerk who'd already informed her that the next eastbound train wouldn't arrive until Thursday, 3 days away, and would cost more than she had. "You planning on standing there all day, miss?" The voice startled her so badly that she nearly dropped the letter. Penelope spun around to find a man leaning against one of the platform's support posts. His arms crossed over his chest as he studied her with an expression that seemed caught between concern and amusement. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy. Worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, scuffed leather boots with spurs that clinked softly when he shifted his weight, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. His eyes were a startling shade of hazel, green and gold mixed together, and they watched her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I'm sorry," Penelope said automatically, her voice hoarse from crying. "I didn't realize I was in anyone's way." "You're not in my way," he replied, pushing off from the post and taking a few steps closer. "But you look like you're about to collapse from the heat, and I've been watching you read that letter over and over for the past 20 minutes. Figured I should check if you're all right." She wanted to tell him she was fine, that everything was perfectly under control, but the concern in his voice cracked something open inside her chest, and suddenly she was crying again, hot tears streaming down her cheeks as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She tried to stop, mortified to be falling apart in front of a complete stranger, but the sobs kept coming and her hands shook so badly that the letter fluttered to the wooden platform. The cowboy moved quickly, bending to retrieve the letter before the desert wind could steal it away. He held it out to her, but when Penelope reached for it with trembling fingers, he pulled it back slightly, his brow furrowing as he glanced at the words written there. "Don't," Penelope gasped, horrified that he might read her private correspondence. "Please, that's mine." "I know it is," he said gently. "And I'm not going to read it if you don't want me to, but maybe you shouldn't either. Forget what it says." The words were so unexpected that Penelope stopped crying, staring at him in confusion. "What? Forget what it says," he repeated, his voice firmer now. "Whatever's in this letter, it's got you tied up in knots and standing alone at a train station looking like your world just ended. So maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe the problem is what this letter's telling you." "You don't understand," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice steady. "That letter is from my aunt. She was supposed to meet me here, but she's not coming, and I don't have enough money to get back home, and I don't know what I'm going to do." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, studying her face with those intense hazel eyes. Then he held out his hand. "Harrison Vale." "Most folks just call me Harris." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm and the warmth of his grip. "Penelope Parker." "Well, Miss Parker, seems to me you've got a few options here. You can stand on this platform and keep reading that letter until you've memorized every word, or you can let me buy you a cold drink and help you figure out what comes next. What do you say?" Penelope knew she should be more cautious. She'd been raised with strict rules about speaking to strange men, about maintaining proper distance and decorum. But all those rules seemed absurd now, when she was stranded in an unfamiliar town with nowhere to turn. Besides, there was something about Harrison Vale that made her feel safer rather than threatened. Maybe it was the gentle way he'd approached her, or the genuine concern in his eyes, or simply the fact that he was offering help when she desperately needed it. "A cold drink sounds wonderful," she admitted quietly. Harris smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less serious. "There's a decent place just down the street. Come on before you melt in that dress." He picked up her carpet bag before she could protest, slinging it over his shoulder with ease, and gestured for her to walk beside him. The main street of Columbus was dusty and wide, lined with low adobe buildings that reflected the harsh sunlight. There were a few horses tied to hitching posts, a wagon rattling past loaded with supplies, and not many people out in the afternoon heat. The saloon Harris led her to was called the Desert Rose, and despite its name, it was a respectable establishment with actual tables and chairs rather than just a bar. Inside, it was blessedly cooler, and Penelope felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as Harris guided her to a table in the corner. A woman in her 40s with graying hair and a kind face came over, nodding at Harris with obvious familiarity. "Afternoon, Harris. Who's your friend?" "This is Miss Penelope Parker. She just arrived on the afternoon train and could use something cold to drink. Think you could manage that, Rosa, of course. 2 lemonades coming right up." Rosa disappeared toward the back, and Harris settled into the chair across from Penelope, setting her carpetbag carefully beside the table. "So," he said, lacing his fingers together on the worn wooden surface, "tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." Penelope didn't know why she trusted him, but something about his steady presence made the words come easier. She explained about her life in St. Louis, how she'd been living with a friend's family after her parents died 2 years ago in a cholera outbreak, how she'd been working as a seamstress but barely making enough to cover her expenses. Then the telegram had arrived from her Aunt Margaret, whom she'd only met once as a child, saying she needed Penelope's help and was sending train fare. The money had arrived the next day, and Penelope had packed her few belongings and made the long journey west, hopeful that she was finally going to have family again, a place to belong. "And then I got here and found that letter," she finished, her voice breaking slightly. "She doesn't want me after all. I don't even know why she changed her mind." Roser returned with 2 tall glasses of lemonade, so cold that condensation immediately beat it on the outside. Penelope drank gratefully, the tart sweetness washing away the dust in her throat. Harris was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. "Your aunt lives here in Columbus." "I thought so. The telegram came from here." "What's her full name?" "Margaret Sullivan. She would be about 50 years old now, I think." Something shifted in Harris's expression, a flicker of recognition followed by what looked like pity. "Miss Parker, I think I know who your aunt is, or was." Penelope's heart lurched. "Was? Margaret Sullivan died 3 weeks ago. Fever took her quick. She didn't have any family here that anyone knew about, so the town buried her in the cemetery out past the church. I'm real sorry." The glass nearly slipped from Penelope's numb fingers. Dead. Her aunt was dead. Which meant the letter couldn't have been from her, which meant someone else had written it, which meant… What? She couldn't make sense of it, couldn't understand why someone would deliberately lure her here and then abandon her. But the telegram came after she died. Penelope asked, trying to work through the timeline. "That doesn't make sense." Harris leaned forward, his expression serious. "No, it doesn't. And that letter you were holding, was that your aunt's handwriting?" "I thought so, but I only have one letter from her from years ago." "I suppose I don't really know." "Can I see it now? The letter from today?" Penelope hesitated, then pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket and handed it across the table. Harris read it carefully, his jaw tightening as he did. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. "This isn't signed. It just says it's from your aunt, but there's no signature." "I didn't even notice," Penelope whispered, feeling foolish. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to get you here and then make sure you had no way to leave. The question is why?" Harris folded the letter and tapped it against the table, thinking. "You have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt you?" "No, of course not. I barely know anyone outside St. Louis, and I can't imagine why anyone would go to such elaborate lengths. It must be some kind of mistake." "Maybe." But Harris didn't sound convinced. "Listen, Miss Parker, it's going to be dark in a few hours, and you need a place to stay. Columbus isn't a big town, but we do have a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She's respectable, charges fair rates, and she'll make sure you're safe. I can take you there, help you get settled." "I don't have enough money for a boarding house," Penelope admitted, humiliation burning in her cheeks. "I have just over $4, and I need that for food and eventually a train ticket home." "How much would you need?" "For the ticket?" "At least $12, probably more." Harris drummed his fingers on the table again, then seemed to come to a decision. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I work at her ranch about 5 miles outside town, the Double V spread. We're owned by my father, Vincent Vale, and we run cattle mostly, some horses. We've been needing help at the main house for months now. My mother died last year, and my father hasn't had the heart to hire anyone permanent, but the place is falling apart without a woman's touch. You said you're a seamstress, so you know how to sew, mend, that sort of thing?" "Yes, but can you cook?" "Reasonably well, yes." "Then I'll offer you a job, room and board plus wages. You work for us for a few weeks, save up enough for your train ticket, and then you can head back to St. Louis with money in your pocket, or if you like it here, you can stay longer. Either way, it solves your immediate problem." It was too generous, too perfect, and Penelope's instinct was to refuse. She didn't know this man, didn't know his father, and the idea of living on a ranch in the middle of the desert seemed impossibly foreign. But what choice did she have? She could refuse and spend the night on the train platform, vulnerable to whoever had brought her here under false pretenses. She could try to find work in town, but that would take time she didn't have and money for lodging she couldn't afford. Or she could accept Harris's offer and at least have a safe place to sleep while she figured out what to do next. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You don't know anything about me." Harris met her eyes steadily. "Because you looked like you needed help, and I was raised to offer it when I could. Because I know what it's like to feel lost and alone, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And because there's something strange about this whole situation, and I'd rather keep you somewhere I know you're safe until we figure out what's going on. You think I'm in danger. I think someone lied to get you here, and until we know why, it pays to be careful." The practical side of Penelope wanted to argue, to insist that she could take care of herself, but the terrified part that had been growing since she read that letter was relieved to have someone else concerned about her safety. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right. Thank you, Mr. Vale. I accept your offer." "Harris," he corrected with a small smile. "If we're going to be working together, might as well use first names, and you're welcome, Penelope. We'll head out to the ranch before it gets dark, let you meet my father and get settled. Sound good?" "Yes, thank you, Harris." They finished their lemonade, and Harris paid Rosa before leading Penelope back out into the afternoon heat. He had a horse tied up outside, a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament. Harris secured Penelope's carpetbag behind the saddle, then swung up onto the horse with practiced ease and offered her his hand. "You ever ridden before?" "Not really, no." "It's all right. Just put your foot in the stirrup and I'll pull you up. You can ride behind me and hold on. Scout here won't mind the extra weight." It took a couple of attempts, and Penelope was mortifyingly aware of how improper it was to be riding with a man she'd just met, her arms wrapped around his waist and her skirts hiked up enough to keep from tangling in the stirrups. But Harris was patient and respectful, and once they started moving, the gentle rhythm of the horse's gait was actually soothing. They rode out of Columbus, heading northwest, following a well-worn trail through the desert landscape. The terrain was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all scrubby vegetation and red-brown earth stretching toward distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, and despite everything that had happened, Penelope felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. "It's beautiful here," she said, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the sound of hoofbeats. "It grows on you," Harris replied. "When I first came back from the war, I couldn't stand how empty it felt. Too much space, too much silence. But after a while, that's exactly what I needed. The land doesn't judge you, doesn't ask questions, it just is. You fought in the war, tail end of it. I was only 16 when I enlisted, lied about my age, saw more than I wanted to before it ended, came home and tried to forget most of it." Penelope tightened her arms around his waist slightly, a gesture of sympathy. "I'm sorry, that must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. I'm 27 now, and most days I don't think about it much. But it taught me not to ignore when someone needs help. Too many times I saw people turn away, pretend they didn't see suffering right in front of them. I swore I wouldn't be like that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Penelope found herself noticing details about the man she was literally clinging to. The breadth of his shoulders, the easy way he sat in the saddle, the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. He'd saved her today, had shown her kindness when she desperately needed it, and she felt a rush of gratitude so strong it brought fresh tears to her eyes. The Double V Ranch came into view as they crested a low rise. It was more substantial than Penelope had expected, with a large main house built of adobe and wood, a big barn, several outbuildings, and corrals where horses moved in the golden light. There were a few men working near the barn, and they waved as Harris rode past, their curious glances sliding over Penelope. Harris guided Scout up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Penelope down with steady hands on her waist. Her legs were shaky from the ride and she stumbled slightly, but Harris caught her elbow and kept her upright. "Takes some getting used to," he said with a sympathetic smile. "Come on, let's go find my father." The interior of the house was dim and cool after the brightness outside, and Penelope's eyes took a moment to adjust. The front room was spacious, with heavy wooden furniture that had seen better days and curtains that were faded from sunlight. Everything was clean but worn, with the air of a place that had lost its heart. "Pa," Harris called. "You here?" "In the kitchen," came a gruff reply. They walked through to the back of the house, where a large kitchen occupied what seemed to be a later addition. A man in his 50s stood at the sink, washing dishes with the grim determination of someone who hated the task. He was broad-shouldered and weathered, with the same hazel eyes as his son and gray streaking his dark hair. When he turned and saw Penelope, his eyebrows rose in surprise. "Harris." "Who's this?" "Pa, this is Miss Penelope Parker. She just arrived in Columbus and found herself in a difficult situation. I thought we might offer her the housekeeper position we've been talking about." Vincent Vale dried his hands on a towel, studying Penelope with an assessing gaze that made her straighten her spine and lift her chin. She might be desperate, but she had her pride. "Miss Parker," Vincent said slowly, "my son has a habit of bringing home strays. Last month it was a half-starved dog, month before that a cat missing an ear. You running from something?" "No, sir," Penelope replied firmly. "I came to Columbus to meet my aunt, but she passed away before I arrived. I need work to earn money for a train ticket home, and your son was kind enough to offer me a position. I'm a skilled seamstress and a competent cook. I'm willing to work hard and earn my keep." Vincent's stern expression softened slightly. "Where's home?" "St. Louis, sir. Long way from there." "You have family waiting for you," Penelope hesitated. "No, sir, no family, just friends." "And you're how old?" 22. Vincent exchanged a long look with his son, and Penelope saw something pass between them, some unspoken communication. Then Vincent sighed and nodded. "All right. We can give it a trial period. Room and board plus $5 a week. That fair?" It was more than fair, it was generous. At that rate she could earn enough for her train ticket in 3 weeks, maybe less. "Yes, sir, thank you. Harris will show you to the spare room. Supper's in an hour. You can start your duties tomorrow." Vincent turned back to his dishes, effectively dismissing them, but Penelope thought she saw approval in the set of his shoulders. Harris led her through the house to a small bedroom at the back. It was simply furnished with a narrow bed, a dresser, a chair, and a window that looked out over the desert. Someone had made an effort to make it welcoming, with a clean quilt on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, but the flowers were long dead, and the whole room had a musty smell of disuse. "My mother's room," Harris said quietly, seeing Penelope's expression. "She died last year from pneumonia. Pa hasn't wanted anyone else in here, but it's time. She would have liked you using it, I think. She was always helping people, always taking in anyone who needed it." "I'm honored," Penelope said, meaning it, "and I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." Harris set her carpetbag on the chair. "Washroom's down the hall. I'll bring you some water so you can freshen up before supper. We keep ranch hours here, so meals are at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 at night. We've got 3 other hands who live in the bunkhouse, but they usually eat with us. It's casual, nothing fancy." "I'll be ready," Penelope assured him. After Harris left, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself absorb everything that had happened. This morning she'd been on a train, excited and nervous about meeting her aunt and starting a new life. Now her aunt was dead. She'd been deceived and abandoned, and she was living on a cattle ranch in New Mexico territory with a family she'd only just met. It was too much to process all at once, so she focused on the immediate tasks instead. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the narrow wardrobe and placing her hairbrush and other necessities on the dresser. Harris brought a pitcher of water as promised, along with towels and soap, and Penelope washed the travel dust from her face and hands, feeling more human afterward. She changed into her other dress, a simple gray cotton that was more suitable for work than the blue traveling outfit, and braided her long brown hair away from her face. When she ventured out to the kitchen at 6 o'clock, she found a scene of comfortable chaos. Vincent was setting the table while Harris carried plates of food from the stove. 3 other men had arrived, all dressed in work clothes and looking tired but cheerful. They introduced themselves as Jack, Miguel, and Sam, ranch hands who'd worked the Double V for years. Their curiosity about Penelope was obvious but polite, and she found herself relaxing as they all sat down to eat. The meal was simple but filling: beef stew, fresh bread, and canned peaches for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, mostly about ranch business and the work that needed doing. Penelope listened more than she spoke, getting a feel for the rhythm of this new place. She noticed how Harris deferred to his father's opinions, but wasn't afraid to disagree when necessary. How the ranch hands clearly respected both Vale men, and how everyone seemed to be genuinely kind to each other. After supper, Penelope insisted on washing the dishes despite Vincent's protests that she didn't start work until tomorrow. It felt good to have something to do with her hands, something normal and domestic that didn't require thinking about the strangeness of her situation. Harris dried while she washed, and they worked together in comfortable silence. "Thank you again," Penelope said quietly, handing him a clean plate, "for everything today. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." "You would have figured it out," Harris replied. "You seem like the resourceful type, but I'm glad I could help." "Do you really think someone deliberately tried to trick me?" Harris was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think it's the most likely explanation. But I also think you're safe here, and we've got time to figure out what happened and why. For now, just focus on settling in. The rest will work itself out." Penelope wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that everything would somehow be fine, but a small knot of worry remained in her chest. Still, she was exhausted from the day's events, and when she finally climbed into the narrow bed in her new room, she fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the desert silence and the feeling that she was, for the moment, protected. The next few days fell into a pattern that was surprisingly comfortable. Penelope rose before dawn to start breakfast, preparing coffee and frying eggs and bacon for the hungry men who stumbled in from their morning chores. She cleaned the house, which desperately needed it, scrubbing floors and windows and beating dust from curtains that hadn't been washed in over a year. She mended clothes, stitching torn shirts and patching worn pants with careful, precise stitches that made the ranch hands joke about how much better they looked now. She cooked meals that were more varied and flavorful than the simple fare they'd been subsisting on, using herbs and spices she found in the pantry along with vegetables from the struggling garden behind the house. And through it all, she found herself increasingly aware of Harris. He was always kind, always respectful, but there was something in the way he looked at her sometimes that made her breath catch. He would linger after meals to help with dishes, telling her stories about the ranch and the surrounding territory. He showed her how to ride properly, giving her lessons on a gentle mare named Daisy so she could go into town if she needed to. He brought her wildflowers that he'd picked while out checking fences, casual offerings that he'd leave on the kitchen table without comment. Penelope tried to maintain appropriate distance, reminding herself that she was an employee here and that she'd be leaving in a few weeks anyway. But it was hard when Harris smiled at her across the breakfast table, when his hand brushed hers as he passed her a plate, when she caught him watching her with an expression that looked almost like longing. On her 5th day at the ranch, Harris suggested they ride into town together. He had business at the feed store, and Penelope wanted to visit the cemetery to pay her respects at her aunt's grave. Vincent gave them permission to take the afternoon off, though his knowing look made Penelope blush. The ride into Columbus was pleasant, with Penelope now confident enough on Daisy to ride beside Harris rather than behind him. They talked easily, the conversation flowing from one topic to another without awkward pauses. Harris told her about growing up on the ranch, about his mother's love for gardening and his father's stubborn pride. Penelope found herself opening up about her own childhood, about parents who had loved her deeply and whose loss still ached, about the loneliness of the past 2 years, and her hope that coming west might give her a fresh start. "Seems like you got your fresh start," Harris observed. "Just not the one you expected." "No," Penelope agreed. "But maybe that's not a bad thing. I like it at the Double V. I like the work, and your father is kind beneath all that gruffness, and the other men make me feel welcome. It's more of a home than I've had in a long time." Something flickered in Harris's eyes, quick and bright. "What if you stayed? Past the few weeks, I mean. What if you just stayed?" Penelope's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I don't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Think about it," Harris urged. "You could stay, keep working at the ranch, build a real life here. Columbus isn't much, but it's got good people. And the territory's growing, changing. There are opportunities here if you're willing to work for them." "Are you trying to convince me to stay for the ranch's sake, or for some other reason?" The boldness of the question surprised Penelope as much as it seemed to surprise Harris. He reined in his horse, and she did the same, both of them stopping in the middle of the trail. The desert stretched around them, vast and beautiful and empty. Harris met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her shiver despite the heat. "I think you know what reason," he said quietly. "I know it's only been a few days, and I know I should be more patient, but Penelope, I've never met anyone like you. You're smart and capable and kind, and when you smile it's like the sun coming out. I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want you to leave." Penelope's breath caught. "Harris, I don't know what to say. This is all happening so fast." "I know. And I'm not asking you to make any promises or decisions right now. I'm just asking you to think about staying, about giving this place, giving us a real chance. Can you do that?" She should have been more cautious. She should have reminded him that they barely knew each other, that she was his employee, that rushing into anything would be foolish. But the truth was that she felt the same pull he did, the same undeniable attraction that had been building between them since the moment he'd approached her on the train platform. She liked him, maybe more than liked him, and the thought of leaving in a few weeks made her chest ache. "I'll think about it," she promised. "But Harris, you need to understand that I can't just stay without knowing more about what happened with my aunt, about why I was brought here under false pretenses. That mystery still scares me." "Then we'll solve it together," Harris said firmly. "Starting today, we'll ask around town, see if anyone knows anything about your aunt or about any strangers who might have been asking about you." They continued into Columbus with renewed purpose. While Harris conducted his business at the feed store, Penelope visited the general store and struck up a conversation with the proprietor, a talkative woman named Mrs. Henderson, who seemed to know everything about everyone in town. When Penelope mentioned Margaret Sullivan, Mrs. Henderson's expression grew sad. "Oh yes, poor Margaret. Such a tragedy. She'd only been in town about 6 months, came here from back east somewhere, said she was looking for a quiet place to spend her retirement. Seemed lonely, though. Used to come into the store just to chat. Did she ever mention having family? Penelope asked carefully. Now that you mention it, she did say something about a niece a few weeks before she died. Said she was thinking of sending for her, that she could use the company. But I didn't know she'd actually done it until Harris mentioned you were her niece. Did anyone else know she was planning to send for me? Mrs. Henderson frowned, thinking. Well, I might have mentioned it to a few people. You know how it is in a small-town news travels. There was a woman who seemed particularly interested, now that I think about it. Stranger, passing through on her way to California or some such. She asked a lot of questions about Margaret, about whether she had money or property. I thought it was odd at the time, but I figured she was just making conversation. Penelope's pulse quickened. What did this woman look like? Oh, late 40s maybe, dark hair going gray, fancy clothes that didn't suit the climate. She had these cold eyes, if you know what I mean. The kind that look right through you. When was this? About a month ago, maybe a little more. She stayed at the boarding house for a few nights, then left on the eastbound train. Penelope thanked Mrs. Henderson and hurried to find Harris, her mind racing. When she told him what she'd learned, his expression grew grim. Sounds like this woman heard about your aunt planning to send for you and saw an opportunity. But opportunity for what? What could she possibly gain from tricking you into coming here? I don't know. Unless she thought I had money, but I clearly don't. Or unless she was trying to get me away from St. Louis for some reason. They visited the cemetery next, a small plot of land surrounded by a simple wooden fence. Margaret Sullivan's grave was marked with a plain wooden cross bearing her name and dates. Penelope stood there for a long moment, looking at the final resting place of a woman she'd never really known, feeling a profound sense of loss for what might have been. I'm sorry I never got to meet you properly, she said softly. I hope you're at peace. Harris stood nearby, giving her space but offering silent support. When Penelope was ready, they walked back to where they'd left the horses, both lost in thought. We should check with the telegraph office, Harris suggested. See if they have any record of the messages that were supposedly sent in your aunt's name. The telegraph operator was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked distinctly uncomfortable when Harris asked about messages from Margaret Sullivan. I can't just give out information about private communications, he protested. Miss Parker is Margaret's niece, Harris said firmly. She has a right to know if someone was using her aunt's name fraudulently, and if you don't want to deal with us, we can always involve the sheriff. The operator sighed and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. All right, all right. What dates are we talking about? Penelope gave him the date she'd received the telegram, and the operator flipped through pages until he found the entry. Here it is. Telegram sent to Penelope Parker in St. Louis, Missouri, dated July 20th. But it wasn't sent by Margaret Sullivan. It was sent by a woman named Caroline Porter. Paid in cash, gave a return address here in Columbus. Penelope and Harris exchanged glances. Did you see this Caroline Porter? Harris asked. Sure. Dark-haired woman, well-dressed, talked with an accent. Eastern, maybe Boston or New York. She came in twice, once to send that telegram and once to send another one about a week later. To St. Louis again. No, that one went to California. Los Angeles, I think. Harris pressed for more information, but the operator couldn't provide any other useful details. They left the telegraph office with more questions than answers, riding back to the ranch in thoughtful silence as the sun began its descent. Over supper that night, Penelope and Harris told Vincent everything they'd learned. The older man listened carefully, his expression growing increasingly troubled. This Caroline Porter woman clearly went to some trouble to deceive you, Penelope. The question is why? If she just wanted money, there are easier targets. If she wanted to hurt you specifically, why go through such an elaborate scheme? It doesn't add up. Unless it wasn't about me at all, Penelope said slowly, an idea forming. What if it was about someone else, someone back in St. Louis? What if getting me out of the way served some other purpose? Like what? Harris asked. I don't know. But I was living with the Morrison family, working as their seamstress. Mr. Morrison is a banker, quite wealthy. What if Caroline Porter wanted access to something I had, or information I knew, or simply wanted me gone so I couldn't interfere with something? Vincent nodded slowly. That's a possibility worth exploring. You should write to the Morrison family. Let them know what happened and ask if anything unusual has occurred since you left. Penelope agreed, and after supper, she sat down at the kitchen table with paper and pen, composing a careful letter that explained her situation without causing undue alarm. She asked if anything had happened that might explain why someone would want her away from St. Louis, and she provided the name Caroline Porter in case it meant anything to them. Harris sat with her while she wrote, cleaning his gun with methodical care. The domesticity of the scene struck Penelope, the two of them sitting together in the lamplight, working on separate tasks but companionably silent. It felt right in a way that made her chest tight with emotion. Harris, she said quietly, setting down her pen. About what you said earlier, about me staying. I want you to know that I'm seriously considering it, not just because of you, although that's a big part of it, but because I feel more at home here after less than a week than I did in St. Louis after 2 years. This place, your family, the work, it all feels right. Like maybe this is where I was supposed to end up all along. Harris looked up from his gun, his hazel eyes bright. Yeah, but I need to resolve this mystery first. I need to know I'm not putting you or your father in danger by staying. And I need to know that whatever happens between us, if anything happens between us, it's real, and not just because we were thrown together by circumstances. It's real for me, Harris said intently. I know my own mind, Penelope, but I understand wanting to be sure. We'll figure out this Caroline Porter business, and then you can make your decision with a clear conscience. Deal. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. And Penelope found herself smiling back, something hopeful unfurling in her chest. The days continued to pass, falling into a comfortable rhythm punctuated by the hard work of ranch life. Penelope threw herself into her duties with renewed energy, taking over not just the housework, but also helping with the garden, which began to flourish under her attention. She learned to bake bread in the outdoor oven, to preserve vegetables and fruits, to manage the complicated logistics of feeding 5 hungry men 3 times a day. She mended everything that needed mending, made new curtains for the main room, and slowly transformed the ranch house from a place that merely functioned into a home. And through it all, she and Harris grew closer. He taught her to ride better, taking her on longer excursions into the desert where he showed her hidden springs and ancient rock formations. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears. He was patient when she was frustrated, encouraging when she doubted herself, and always respectful of the boundaries she'd set, even though she could see the desire in his eyes every time he looked at her. Vincent noticed, of course. One evening about 2 weeks after Penelope's arrival, he pulled her aside after supper and spoke bluntly in the way she'd learned was his nature. My son's falling in love with you, probably already has. You feel the same way. Penelope felt her cheeks heat but met his eyes steadily. I do, sir. But I haven't encouraged anything inappropriate. I know my place here. Your place here is whatever you make it, Vincent said gruffly. I can see the way you look at him too, girl, and I can see the way this house has come back to life since you arrived. My wife would have liked you very much. She always said Harris needed someone strong to stand beside him, someone who wouldn't be cowed by his moods or his stubbornness. I think you might be that person. Mr. Vale, I appreciate your confidence, but Harris and I barely know each other, and there's still the matter of whoever brought me here under false pretenses. So get to know him better. Figure out the mystery. But don't let fear keep you from something good. Life's too short and too hard out here to waste chances at happiness when they come along. The older man patted her shoulder awkwardly and walked away, leaving Penelope standing in the kitchen with tears prickling her eyes. She'd lost so much: her parents, her security, her sense of belonging, but maybe, just maybe, she was finding something better here in the New Mexico desert. A week later, a reply arrived from the Morrisons in St. Louis. Harris rode into town to collect the mail and brought it back to Penelope with an expression that told her the news wasn't good even before she opened the envelope. Mrs. Morrison's letter was brief but alarming. 2 days after Penelope left St. Louis, someone had broken into the Morrison home and ransacked Penelope's room. Nothing had been taken from anywhere else in the house, but all of Penelope's belongings had been thoroughly searched and left in disarray. The family had reported it to the police, but had no idea what the intruder might have been looking for. Mrs. Morrison was deeply concerned for Penelope's safety and begged her to be careful. She was looking for something, Penelope said, her hands shaking as she held the letter. Caroline Porter sent me away so she could search my things without me there to stop her. But what could I possibly have that she wanted? Harris took the letter from her trembling fingers and read it himself, his jaw tight. Did you have anything valuable? Jewelry, documents, anything like that? No, nothing. A few pieces of costume jewelry that my mother left me, some photographs, my parents' marriage certificate and death certificates. Nothing worth anything to anyone but me. May I see them? The documents. Penelope retrieved the small wooden box where she kept her precious mementos. Harris examined each document carefully, holding them up to the light, studying every detail. When he got to her parents' marriage certificate, he paused, his brow furrowing. Penelope, your father's name was John Parker. Yes. And your mother was Sarah Whitmore before she married. Yes, that's right. Harris was quiet for a long moment, still studying the certificate. Do you know anything about your mother's family, her parents' siblings? Not much. She said she was estranged from them, that they disapproved of her marrying my father. I think there was money involved, her family had it, and they thought she was marrying beneath her station. She never talked about them. What was her father's name? I don't remember. Something pretentious, I think. Mother used to joke about it. Harris pointed to the marriage certificate, where Sarah's father was listed as a witness. Charles Whitmore Porter. Penelope stared at the name, then up at Harris, comprehension dawning. Porter, like Caroline Porter. Might be a coincidence, but I don't think so. I think Caroline Porter is related to your mother, and I think she was looking for something that proves your connection to the Whitmore family. The question is why, and why now? They took their suspicions to Vincent, who immediately suggested they wire the sheriff in St. Louis to see if there was any information about the Whitmore family or Caroline Porter. It took 3 days to receive a response, but when it came, it explained everything. Charles Whitmore Porter had died 6 months ago, leaving behind a substantial fortune. His will divided the estate among his living descendants, but there was a problem. His only daughter, Sarah, had been declared dead years ago when she couldn't be located after her husband's death. Caroline Porter, Charles's younger sister and Sarah's aunt, stood to inherit everything if Sarah truly was dead and had left no heirs. But if Sarah had a daughter, if Penelope could prove her identity and her claim, then she was entitled to a significant portion of the estate. Caroline must have suspected that Sarah might have had children, must have hired investigators to track down any possible heirs. When she found out about Penelope, she'd engineered the elaborate scheme to search Penelope's belongings for proof of her identity. The fact that she'd sent Penelope to New Mexico suggested she'd either found what she needed or determined that Penelope had no documentation that could threaten her inheritance. She was wrong, Harris said, tapping the marriage certificate. This proves who your mother was. Combined with your birth certificate and your parents' death certificates, you have everything you need to make a legal claim. Penelope sat down heavily, her mind reeling. I'm an heiress, potentially a wealthy one, Vincent confirmed. If the sheriff's information is accurate, we're talking about a fortune substantial enough that Caroline Porter was willing to commit fraud and possibly worse to protect it. I don't want it, Penelope said immediately. I don't care about money or estates or any of that. I just want to live my life in peace. The money's yours by right, Harris said gently. And even if you don't want it, Caroline Porter tried to steal it from you. She lied to you, manipulated you, had your things searched. Don't you think she should answer for that? Penelope did, she realized. She thought of that terrifying moment on the train platform when she'd been abandoned and alone, thought of the fear and confusion and betrayal she'd felt. Caroline Porter had done that deliberately, had treated Penelope like an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. That deserved consequences. What should I do? We wire the authorities in St. Louis, let them know what we've discovered. We send copies of your documents to establish your identity. We let the law handle Caroline Porter and the estate, Vincent said firmly. In the meantime, you stay here where you're safe. If Caroline's willing to go this far, she might be dangerous if she realizes her scheme failed. It took several weeks to sort everything out. Penelope had to make a sworn statement for the sheriff in St. Louis, had to provide copies of all her documents, had to answer dozens of questions through telegraph correspondence. The Morrison family, outraged on her behalf, hired a lawyer to represent her interests and pursue charges against Caroline Porter. The authorities in California located Caroline and arrested her for fraud and attempted theft. Through it all, the work of the ranch continued. Summer faded into early autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets that painted the desert in shades of crimson and gold. Penelope had long since earned enough money for a train ticket back to St. Louis, but the idea of leaving never seriously crossed her mind. This was home now. These people were her family, and Harris had become the center of her world in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. They hadn't kissed yet, hadn't done more than hold hands occasionally when they were alone, but the tension between them was a living thing, growing stronger with each passing day. Penelope could feel Harris holding himself back, giving her time and space to resolve the legal matters and decide what she wanted. She appreciated his patience, but she was also increasingly frustrated by it. One evening in late September, Harris took her riding to watch the sunset from a high point that overlooked the ranch. They sat on a flat rock, their horses grazing nearby as the sky performed its nightly spectacular show. "Lawyer sent another telegram today," Harris said quietly. "Said your claim to the estate has been approved. Once Caroline Porter's legal troubles are resolved, you'll inherit about half of your grandfather's fortune. The other half goes to some distant cousins. It's enough money that you'll never have to worry about anything again." Penelope had been expecting this news, but hearing it confirmed still felt strange. "I suppose I should feel happy about it." "You don't. I don't know. It seems wrong somehow, inheriting money from people who rejected my mother, who wanted nothing to do with her because she married for love instead of money. Part of me wants to refuse it out of principle." Harris was quiet for a moment, watching the sun sink lower. "What would your mother want you to do?" The question stopped Penelope short. She thought about her mother, about the woman who'd chosen love over wealth and had never seemed to regret it for a moment. "She'd want me to be practical. She'd say money is just a tool and what matters is how you use it. So use it well. Keep some for security, give some to people who need it, invest in things that matter to you. Make it mean something your mother would be proud of. That's good advice. I have my moments." Harris turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made Penelope's breath catch. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. The legal stuff is basically resolved. You've got money now, options, freedom to do whatever you want. Are you going to stay?" Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the question she'd been expecting, the one she'd been thinking about constantly for weeks. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're going to keep being a gentleman about this, or if you're ever going to actually tell me how you feel." Harris blinked, clearly surprised. "I thought I had. That day on the trail, I told you I couldn't stop thinking about you. That was weeks ago, and you haven't said anything since except to be patient and kind and respectful, which I appreciate, Harris, truly. But I need to know if what you felt then is still true now, or if you've changed your mind, or if you're waiting for something." "Changed my mind." Harris's voice was rough. "Penelope, I haven't changed my mind. If anything, it's gotten worse. Every day I fall a little more in love with you. Every time you smile at me across the breakfast table. Every time you laugh at one of my stupid jokes. Every time I see you bringing this ranch back to life, the way you've brought me back to life, I fall harder. I've been trying to give you space because I know you've been dealing with a lot, because I didn't want you to feel pressured. But if you want to know how I feel, I'll tell you. I love you. I'm completely, hopelessly in love with you, and I want you to stay forever." Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Why didn't you say so?" "I just did." "No, I mean, why did you wait so long? Harris, I've been in love with you for weeks. I've been waiting for you to say something, to make a move, to give me any indication that this was going somewhere beyond just friendship. I was starting to think maybe you only wanted me to stay as a housekeeper." Harris stared at her for a moment, then started to laugh, a deep, genuine sound that made Penelope laugh too. "We're both idiots. Apparently." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "For the record, yes, I'm staying. I'm staying because I love you, because I love this ranch and your father and this strange, beautiful desert. I'm staying because for the first time in 2 years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Harris pulled her closer, and then finally, he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something that made Penelope's head spin, and her toes curl in her boots. She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the pent-up emotion and desire of the past weeks, and Harris made a low sound in his throat that sent shivers down her spine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harris rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me." "What? Marry me?" "I know it's fast, and I know we should probably wait longer, but Penelope, I don't want to wait. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life with you here, raise a family if that's something you want. I want everything with you." "Yes," Penelope whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." They kissed again, and this time it was celebration and promise and joy all wrapped together. The sun finished setting, painting them both in gold and crimson light, and Penelope thought that maybe being abandoned at a train station had been the best thing that ever happened to her. They rode back to the ranch holding hands, both of them grinning like fools. When they told Vincent their news, the older man surprised them both by sweeping Penelope into a tight hug. "Welcome to the family, daughter. It's about damn time. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Columbus. Penelope wore a dress she'd sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Harris wore his best clothes, his hair finally properly cut for the occasion. Mrs. Henderson and Rosa from the saloon helped decorate the church with wildflowers and ribbons. The ranch hands served as groomsmen, and Vincent walked Penelope down the aisle with obvious pride. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when Harris kissed his bride, the assembled townsfolk cheered. The reception afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and more food than seemed possible for such a small community to produce. There was music and dancing, and Penelope found herself swept from partner to partner, laughing and breathless. But her favorite moment came later when the guests had departed and she and Harris stood together under the stars, his arms wrapped around her waist as she leaned back against his chest. "Happy," he murmured against her hair, deliriously. "You can't remember being happier." "Although I'm looking forward to being even happier in about 10 minutes when I get you alone in our room." Penelope blushed but laughed, turning in his arms to kiss him. Our room. That sounds perfect. Their wedding night was everything Penelope had hoped for and nothing like what she'd feared. Harris was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished as they explored this new intimacy together. It was awkward at first, fumbling in the lamplight, but it was also wonderful, and when Harris held her afterward, both of them satisfied and drowsy, Penelope felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "Love you," Harris whispered, already half asleep. "Love you too. Forever." Life as a married woman suited Penelope. She continued managing the household, but now there was an added joy in knowing this was truly her home, that she was building something permanent with Harris. They worked together to improve the ranch, using some of Penelope's inheritance to purchase better breeding stock and repair equipment that had been making do for too long. Vincent was grateful for the help, but refused to take more than what was necessary, proud and independent to the end. Winter came, cold and sometimes harsh, but Penelope found she loved the desert even in its harshest season. There was a stark beauty to the landscape dusted with snow, and the warmth of the ranch house made it a cozy refuge. She and Harris spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. It was in February, during a particularly cold spell, that Penelope realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before she said anything. When she told Harris, he reacted with such pure joy that she started crying, and then they were both laughing and crying and holding each other while Vincent banged on their door asking if everything was all right. "Everything's perfect, Pa," Harris called back. "You're going to be a grandfather." The whoop of joy from the other side of the door made them both grin. Pregnancy agreed with Penelope, though she suffered through morning sickness that lasted most of the day and made Harris fret constantly. He was overprotective to a sometimes annoying degree, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work and hovering anxiously whenever she looked the slightest bit tired. Vincent was more practical, making sure she ate properly and got enough rest, but not treating her like she was made of glass. Summer arrived again, completing a full year since Penelope had first stood on that train platform with a letter that had broken her heart. Now she stood in the garden behind the ranch house, one hand on her swollen belly, marveling at how completely her life had changed. She'd gained a husband, a father-in-law, a home, and soon a child. She'd found purpose and peace and a love that made every day brighter. The baby arrived in early October during the first cool days of autumn. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Harris, pacing outside the bedroom while Rosa and Mrs. Chen attended his wife, genuinely feared he might lose her. But Penelope was strong, and when the baby's cry finally filled the house, Harris burst into the room to find her exhausted but smiling, cradling a red-faced infant against her chest. "It's a boy," Rosa announced, beaming. "A healthy boy." Harris sank down on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists angrily at the world. "He's perfect. You're perfect. God, Penelope, I was so scared." "So was I," she admitted, "but he's here and he's healthy and we're fine." "Do you want to hold him?" Harris took his son with trembling hands, marveling at how small and perfect he was. "We should name him Vincent after Pa." "Vincent Harris Vale," Penelope said, testing the name. "I like it." When they brought the baby out to meet his grandfather, Vincent tried to maintain his gruff composure but failed completely, tears streaming down his weathered face as he held his grandson. "Looks like you, boy," he told Harris. "Poor kid." "He's beautiful," Harris said firmly, "just like his mother." The next few years passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion and growth. Young Vincent, who they called Vinny, grew into a rambunctious toddler who kept everyone on their toes. Penelope and Harris worked together to continue improving the ranch, which prospered under their combined efforts. They used more of the inheritance to buy additional land and hire more help, and the Double V became known throughout the territory for the quality of its cattle and horses. 2 years after Vinny was born, Penelope gave birth to twin girls. Harris had been hoping for another son but fell instantly in love with his daughters, tiny identical creatures with their mother's dark hair and his hazel eyes. They named them Rose and Ruth, and the ranch house rang with the sound of children's laughter. Vincent Sr. lived long enough to see his grandchildren grow, passing away peacefully in his sleep when Vinny was 7. Harris grieved deeply, but he took comfort in knowing his father had spent his final years happy, surrounded by family and watching his legacy secured. They buried Vincent on a hill overlooking the ranch with a proper stone marker that read Vincent Vale, loving father and grandfather, 1825–1892. More children followed. Another boy they named Jack, then another girl called Margaret in honor of Penelope's aunt. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Harris building additional rooms and a proper second floor. It was noisy and chaotic and sometimes overwhelming, but it was filled with love. Penelope never forgot the terror and betrayal she'd felt on that train platform so many years ago, but she'd come to see it as a necessary pain that had led her to exactly where she needed to be. Caroline Porter had spent several years in prison for fraud, eventually dying there of pneumonia, her schemes having gained her nothing in the end. The inheritance that had caused so much trouble was used to build something good. A thriving ranch, a stable home for 5 children, and security for the family's future. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Harris took Penelope back to that spot where they'd watched the sunset the night he'd proposed. They were older now, weathered by sun and work and life, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. "You ever regret it?" Harris asked, holding her hand as they sat on the same flat rock. "Staying here instead of going back to St. Louis, marrying a cowboy instead of someone sophisticated," Penelope laughed. "Not for a single moment. This life, this place, you and our children, it's everything I never knew I wanted." "That letter I was holding when you found me, the one that said my aunt didn't want me, the one you told me to forget, you were right. The best thing I ever did was forget what it said and focus on what was right in front of me." "And what was that?" "You. A stubborn, kind, wonderful man who saw someone in trouble and decided to help. Who offered me a home when I had nowhere to go, who gave me love when I thought I'd be alone forever. "You saved me, Harris." "Pretty sure we saved each other," he replied, pulling her close. "I was just going through the motions before you arrived. You gave me something to live for again, made this place feel like home instead of just where I worked. You saved me too." They watched the sunset in comfortable silence, the same spectacular show of colors they'd witnessed together so many times before. In the distance, the ranch sprawled across the desert floor, a testament to everything they'd built together. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house where their children were likely causing some kind of chaos that would need addressing when their parents returned. The thought made Penelope smile. "We should get back," she said eventually. "Margaret's probably trying to convince Jack to help her catch frogs again, and you know how that ended last time." Harris groaned. "Don't remind me. I'm still finding frogs in strange places." They rode back together, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. The story of how they'd met had become family legend, told and retold to their children, who loved hearing about the day their mother had been abandoned at a train station, and their father had told her to forget what the letter said. "Tell us again," Rose would beg, snuggling up to her mother at bedtime. "Tell us about the letter and the cowboy." And Penelope would tell them, making sure they understood that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best things, that kindness from strangers could change everything, and that love real, true love was worth fighting for. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep joy. The children grew up, some staying to help run the ranch while others sought their fortunes elsewhere. Vinny took over management of the Double V from his father, proving himself as capable and hardworking as Harris had been. The twins married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with yet another generation of voices and laughter. Harris and Penelope grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining as strong as it had been that day on the train platform when he'd first offered her help. They spent their later years teaching their grandchildren to ride, telling stories of the old days, and simply enjoying the peace they'd worked so hard to build. On a warm spring evening in 1920, when Penelope was 60 years old and had been married to Harris for 38 years, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset. Their hands were clasped together, weathered and worn but still fitting perfectly. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Penelope asked softly. "That very first day when I was standing on the platform with that letter, I said a lot of things that day. You said forget what it says. The letter, I mean. You told me to forget what it said." Harris smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "Best advice I ever gave. Best advice I ever took. Everything good in my life came from that moment, from choosing to trust you instead of that letter. Our children, our grandchildren, this life we've built, all of it came from that choice. No regrets, not a single one." "You?" Harris pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, both of them content to sit in comfortable silence as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. The same colors that had surrounded them the night he'd proposed, the night she'd said yes, the night they'd committed to building a life together. "No regrets," Harris confirmed. "Not a single one." They lived like that for another decade, watching their family continue to grow and thrive, seeing the ranch prosper through good years and bad, and holding tight to each other through every storm. When Harris finally passed away at the age of 76, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, his last words were for Penelope. "Thank you," he whispered, his hand clasped in hers, "for staying, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you for finding me," she replied through tears. "For saving me, for giving me this beautiful life." Penelope lived 3 more years after Harris's death, spending that time telling their story to anyone who would listen, making sure their grandchildren and great-grandchildren understood the importance of kindness, of taking chances on love, of not letting fear or convention keep you from happiness. She passed peacefully in her sleep in 1933, and they buried her next to Harris on the hill overlooking the ranch, together in death as they had been in life. The letter that had brought Penelope to Columbus, the one Harris had told her to forget, had long since turned to dust. But the love story it had inadvertently started lived on through generations, a testament to the power of choosing hope over despair, trust over fear, and love over everything else. The Double V Ranch continued to thrive under Vinnie's management and eventually his children's. And the story of the woman who was abandoned at the train station and the cowboy who told her to forget what the letter said became a cherished part of the family's history. Because sometimes, the worst moments in life are actually disguised blessings, leading us exactly where we need to be. And sometimes, forgetting the words that hurt us is the first step toward finding the love that heals us. The desert remembered them, the land they'd worked and loved and built upon. The ranch house still stood, expanded and modernized over the years, but still fundamentally the same home that Harris had brought Penelope to all those decades ago. And if you stood on that hill at sunset, where two weathered headstones marked the resting place of Harrison and Penelope Vale, you could almost hear their story whispered on the desert wind. A story of abandonment that became belonging, of fear that became courage, of a letter that meant nothing and a love that meant everything. A story that proved that sometimes the best thing you can do is forget what the world tells you and focus instead on what your heart knows is true. And in the end, isn't that what all the best love stories teach us? That love found in unexpected places can be the truest kind, that strangers can become family, and that the courage to start over can lead to happiness beyond anything we ever imagined. The tale of Harrison Vale and Penelope Parker became legend in Columbus, New Mexico, told and retold with embellishments and romantic flourishes, but the core truth remained. A cowboy had seen a woman in trouble and decided to help, and that simple act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about the way love could bloom even in the harshest environments, as resilient and beautiful as the wildflowers that grew in the desert after rain. And that really is all any of us can hope for, to be seen when we're struggling, to be helped when we're lost, and to find love when we least expect it. The rest, as they say, is just details. Beautiful, precious, hard-won details, but details nonetheless. The sun set over the Double V Ranch, painting the sky in those same shades of gold and crimson it had shown for decades, constant and beautiful and unchanging. The ranch prospered, the family grew, and the legacy of Harrison and Penelope continued. Proof that sometimes the best happily ever afters are the ones we build ourselves, one day at a time, with courage and hope and an unwavering commitment to love. And that letter that started it all. Forgotten, as it should be, replaced by a much better story, one of a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that would endure for generations to come.